Sometimes Wizards of the Coast make some very cool Magic cards that don't make any sense. Greetings, owners of fine luxury cardboard rectangles. We are here today to talk about a brand new spoiler card from Theros Beyond Death. One that I think is actually a really cool card. And here's the shocker for a bunch of you who are familiar with the channel. We're going to be talking about a blue card. And you'll know normally I'm a little bit down with blue. But there are certain aspects of blue I genuinely enjoy. I may not enjoy facing off against counterspells and things like that. But there are certain aspects of blue that call to me and are fun. And when I started out playing Magic, I started playing green. But I did drift into blue, messing around with merfolk and other creatures of the deep. And that's what we're here to talk about today. We're going to talk about a card that actually, when you look at it, starts to not make any sense. And it actually made me think of a really old school Magic card too, in the same kind of vein. It's a giant sea beast that also kind of doesn't make sense. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at a couple of cool nostalgic cards, and then we will move in to the spoiler for today. All right, so back in the day when it came to big, beefy creatures in Magic the Gathering, there was an insane rule of design that said these creatures had to have massive drawbacks too. So we're going to take a look at Leviathan, which is one of these creatures with massive drawbacks, but also massive, beefy power. Leviathan was actually the biggest creature in the game when it showed up. There was nothing this size. Yes, you could try and like boost pump other creatures bigger than this, but base stats, nothing was bigger than the 10-10 on Leviathan. And I remember being so impressed by those stats where I was like, oh my god, 10-10. All you have to do is hit your opponent with this twice and you win. Why waste your time with measly little bears and goats and stuff when you can just go, gigantic water beast, consume those who defy me. So Leviathan is 4 blue and 5 for a 10-10 trampler. 10-10 trampler. So what's the catch, you ask? Well, the catch is quite big. And that actually works on multiple levels, right? Because if you manage to catch a Leviathan, that would be a big catch. Bonus cleverness. So Leviathan comes into play tapped and does not untap as normal during your untap phase. You have to sacrifice 2 islands during your upkeep to untap the Leviathan. And the Leviathan may not attack unless you sacrifice 2 islands during your attack. So I mean, that's old school wording. It's basically like when you go to attack with Leviathan, sacrifice 2 lands. So yeah, on the surface of it, you go, oh god, I have to pay all that mana. It comes into play tapped, and I have to sacrifice 4 islands to swing with it once, 6 islands to swing with it twice? Like, that's crazy. Actually, no, what am I talking about? That's 8 islands, because you have to sack 2 islands every turn to untap it. 8 islands! 8 islands to attack with it twice. That's insane. But where the doesn't make sense part comes in is when we actually turn to the artwork. Sure, when you look at the artwork at first, you're like, okay, gigantic Leviathan, looks pretty massive. They included a building for scale on a hill, and then your brain goes, wait, what? What's going on here? Is this a situation where the Leviathan is flying through the sky? Is that the moon in the upper right hand corner behind him, and it's like and there are all kinds of clouds around him, and this Leviathan is flying through the sky and just leaping up to eat a building off of a cliff, like a little lighthouse or something? And then your brain goes, no, okay, well maybe it's underwater. But then you look at it and go, how can this be underwater? Inside the house, it looks like it's lit up by like torchlight or by fires, but there's no like closures on the windows or the doors or anything. It's just got and so this place would be completely flooded with water. How does any of this work? So I remember looking at it and going, I don't understand. I do not understand. So Leviathan was the first big, bad, gigantic sea beastie on this level that truly impressed me. I mean, there were other blue, bigger creatures, but those were meh in comparison. The Leviathan was just a gigantic, I'm gonna rock your world style beast. And he was king of the roost until, well, I mean, if sea creatures can have a roost, he was king of the reef. There we go, that's better. Until Polar until the Polar Kraken came along. We're talking about Krakens and Leviathans today. So the Polar Kraken is not one that's confusing. I just want to talk about it because it just tickles that whole like nostalgia memory with the beefcakes. And it's a cool card. 3 blue and 8. 11 mana. 11 mana for an 11/11 Trampler. Cumulative upkeep, sacrifice a land. So again, we have a giant blue creature you have to keep feeding lands to. But at least it doesn't have any kind of ridiculous concept where you have to sacrifice every time you're going to attack with it and sacrifice every time it untaps. Although it does come into play tapped. So it's 11 mana for an 11/11 Trampler. Cumulative upkeep, sack a land. Comes into play tapped. It was big. Really, really big. No bigger than that. It was big. Arna Kennerid, Sky Knight. So I just the funniness of the flavor text combined with the insanity of the artwork, where you can see this Polar Kraken, and this is from Ice Age, right? So Ice Age had all kinds of snow-covered lands. This is a Polar Kraken devouring a snow-covered island, eating the whole thing. And the sense of scale with the polar bears is so epic. You can see the one polar bear that's kind of trying to stand its ground, and it's either roaring at the Polar Kraken or screaming in horror. And then you can see other polar bears just falling off the edge of it. This is amazing. I mean, the Polar Kraken has such an effect that it's almost like tectonic shifts when it starts to mess with the land, and the polar bears being there to show you just how massive and insane this thing is, because polar bears are scary beasts. I don't know if you guys have ever seen like footage of somebody getting attacked by one, but it's pretty insane, honestly. So I really enjoy the artwork on this, and I like that they had an even bigger, beefier Kraken. Now, we've got a situation where we're going to talk about a brand new Kraken, whatever, however you want to pronounce it. I don't care. I know some people in the comments will. There were some people who were really worked up about how I said Satyr, even though it's totally an acceptable pronunciation. So, go ahead and run down in the comments if you don't like the way I say things. Knock yourself out, because in all honesty, that little flurry of activity, it helps the channel. And on that note, if you haven't already, hit like and subscribe on the channel. Let's get all the metrics going and make YouTube love what I'm doing. So, the spoiler card that we have to look at today is the Nader Kraken. So, if you don't know what Nader means, it means the ultimate low point, essentially, right? You have like, it's the contrasting to a zenith. Zenith is the height of goodness, and Nadir is the basically height of lowness. It is your lowest possible point. So this is the Kraken that is the end of your existence. So I like this card a lot, in all honesty. 2 blue and 1 for a 2/3. Whenever you draw a card, you may pay 1 colorless. If you do, put a +1/+1 counter on Nadir Kraken, and create a 1/1 blue tentacle creature token. So the inevitability, that's one of the things I like about this, right? You take a look at the artwork, you can see the concept of the gigantic mouth of the Kraken there in the back. And you can see all the tentacles up around these ships, kind of creating a prison around them, kind of almost funneling them towards the mouth that will be their inevitable demise. And I really like that. That's what this gives a feeling of, inevitability. Because this card grows bigger each time you draw a card, and you're guaranteed a card draw every turn, and you're pretty much guaranteed to have mana every turn. So this beast is going to grow larger and larger and larger. It's absolutely intense. On top of it growing larger, you get extra token creatures as well. In terms of like blue cards, blue normally doesn't have like awesome army generating cards on the regular. This really stands out. It feels like you get a lot for your mana, and it feels like this is something that's going to absolutely dominate in limited environments. It feels like a draft/sealed bomb, because if it doesn't get answered quickly, it's just going to give you such massive advantage that you're going to be very difficult to beat. Now, I said in the beginning, we were talking about stuff that doesn't make sense. This card's awesome, but it also doesn't make sense when you start to look at things mechanically, right? Because there's a couple of issues. One is creating a 1/1 blue tentacle creature token makes it so that the tentacles are essentially independent beings, right? Like each tentacle would have its own mind and be able to operate independently. Like I can use this tentacle to block a creature or as a sacrifice or something else, and it counts as a creature. Like there's just some weirdness in that regard. Also, the fact that these tentacles are supposed to be 1/1. Normally 1/1s are like, okay, like here's a cat, here's a human, here's whatever. Something that's not like too beefy. But take a look at the size of the tentacles and take a look at these boats. These boats, these ships aren't supposed to be toys, right? These aren't toy ships in somebody's bathtub. So if you look at the scale, how many people would fit on each of these ships, right? And each of the tentacles that are rising up, like, look at the size of a ship. How tall are these ships? Like, with the mast and everything, how tall are they? 10 feet tall? 15 feet tall? How tall does that make the tentacles? 50 feet tall? You're telling me a tentacle that's 50 feet tall and thicker than a ship is just a 1/1. That makes no sense. It makes no sense. From the perspective of the artwork, when you look at it, it does not logically add up. It looks cool at first glance, but the diminutive nature of the ships compared to the power and toughness scale of the tentacles makes it seem like this isn't, it diminishes an aspect of the realness, the reality to it. And I understand we're talking about Magic the Gathering. This is a magical fantasy world, but when you go into any fantasy world, you have logical rules that you follow. There's a certain level of willing suspension of your disbelief. I mean, you're dealing with magic in the first place, but the size of the boats is what totally throws everything off for me. If they didn't have the boat, or they just had one massive ship in the middle instead, it would feel like the tentacle and 1/1 stuff made more sense. But I also understand that from a purely art perspective, if you remove the mechanical nature of the card's elements, this is a pretty intense piece of artwork where you can see essentially an entire armada is about to be swallowed up by a gigantic sea kraken. And that's a pretty cool concept. I mean, this is something that comes from Scandinavian mythology originally. It basically, what is thought to have happened is they thought that people saw these massive 15-foot long squids and just said, oh, there are gigantic sea beasts out there. And I can understand how people would come to that conclusion. But either way, overall, I really like this card. I think it's a powerful, cool card. I just think that the artwork and the mechanics don't mesh together to make a lick of sense overall. So let me know what you guys think. I know with this kind of a scenario, not everybody cares, right? Not everybody's going to give a damn at all. They're just going to be like, well, you know what, man, I don't care. You're being nitpicky. But talking about flavor, diving deep, being a nitpicky kind of guy, that's what I do here. And I'm having a great time doing it. I figured this would be a fun video to end off the year on. So let me know what you guys think about this card overall. You're invited to come to tonight's New Year's Eve stream. We've got some cool stuff going on. It's going to be mega epic, and by that I mean I've got like a little tube to shoot off when the year changes. So come on by and hang out, my friends. You're welcome, unless you actually have something better to do, in which case go do something better. So thanks for coming by. I appreciate it. I'll put some links to some more videos up here, including the playlist of all of my Theros spoilers. If you want to spend more time delving into Theros and exploring it with me, you're welcome to do so. Thanks for coming by, everybody. Big shout out to my patrons and channel members. And remember, together, we are the 6th color of magic.